Welcome to Daydreams, Mr. Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great tonight. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. You know, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you. I know we've had somewhat of a rushed interaction, but I do want to get to know a little bit more about you.
Sure. What would you like to know?
How did you get started in suicide prevention or suicide awareness?
Oh gosh, I was in the military, and just the first thing when I was in the military for 10 years, active duty Air Force, and just got the opportunity to fly all over the world, and I ended up getting out with zero intention of getting back in, and went to seminary, got my degree at Southwestern in Christian education, and just started working with kids, mostly 6th through 12th grade, sometimes with college kids. Just absolutely loved working with that population, and the whole time just felt just this call, just this pull to go back into the military. And so tripped over a recruiter one day, found myself back in the Army as a chaplain. First assignment was over in Iraq. So got out of schooling, right over to Iraq. We're just really dealing with people that are going through some really difficult situations, difficult times, whether it's because of the combat zone we were in, or whether it was just stuff from home, and just the opportunity to sit with people and talk them through the things that they're going through. Got back from the deployment, and just really got some good education in suicide, and I was selected to go to a 5-day training to learn how to become a trainer to teach people how do I have a conversation with a person that's having thoughts of suicide, through the ASSIST program, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training Program. It's put out by Living Works Education, and so really got to not only work with individuals that were having thoughts of suicide, but sit down with people that wanted to become caregivers and learn, how do I have a conversation with someone that's having thoughts of suicide. So that was about 2009. So I've been doing it probably about 12 years now, and just really have a passion and a fire to do this.
Wow. And welcome, Jordan. Welcome to the chat. Good to see you again. Now, you said you were stationed in Iraq there for a little bit. Was there a lot of PTSD? Now, what is it like being over in Iraq, knowing what you know?
Well, it was hard. It was during the surge. So if you remember back in 2006, 2007, when we were just had a great uptick of individuals that were moving into country, and then those people that were there, a lot of them were getting extended. Hey, I'm going to be here for a year, and now all of a sudden that's getting pushed out to 15 months. Just as far as what people were seeing, hearing, smelling, experiencing, it was a really hard time. If you look back at the numbers, we were losing a lot of servicemen, not only to combat, but we were also losing them to suicide. So it was a very difficult situation. People were seeing and hearing things that they're just not normally used to. And so we were seeing a lot of people that were greatly affected by that. But what we have a tendency to see with service members is, we know that we're there to do a job. And so we take everything that we're taking in, we have a tendency to just kind of bottle up. And so we see that PTSD, we see post-traumatic stress kind of manifest itself after we come home. And then, 6 to 8 months down the road is when we really see that's really, now it's really affecting my life. It's affecting my choices. It's affecting my relationships, how I interact with people, and all those things. And now I don't know how to deal with that myself, because if you look back historically, we don't have a lot of treatment for PTSD, with
Right.
the greatest generation that went through World War II, and then what I would consider my parents' generation that went through Vietnam. We said, hey, you know what, deal with it. And so we did. A lot of service members, a lot of veterans out there didn't have that outlet to deal with what they were feeling. And so I think now the behavioral science is really kind of opening up and figuring out how do we best treat people like this.
Right. When it comes to PTSD and personnel in the military, it makes sense to me. It makes sense, being in the midst of combat and having traumatic events, literally going to war, life or death, not sure
Right.
if you're going to survive, not sure if you're going to have to kill somebody on the other side. I understand that. Now, do you think the same mechanisms are in play? How is that related to suicide in a sense? Because I know they're related. I'm just trying to connect the two.
Right. So you think about this is just not a military topic. It's a person goes through some sort of traumatic experience, and you and I might go through that the same experience, but how you process it may be different from how I process it. And you may process it in healthy ways where you can cope with it, where you can work your way through it. But then I might be that person that I can't figure out how to process what I've been through. I can't get this out of my mind. I'm having reoccurring nightmares about it. I'm living with this day in and day out. So if I'm not getting any help with it, think about, what is the level of emotional pain that I'm dealing with, because I don't know how to process my thoughts. I don't know how to process the actions that I'm going through. I'm driving down the street and I have this startle response if somebody cuts me off, or I'm in a crowded room. And because of what's happened to me, I have this flight or flight response, and I'm just not dealing with things well. And so the emotional turmoil that a person may go through, when we look at suicide, it's not that a person is having thoughts of suicide wants to die. It's that a person having thoughts of suicide wants the pain to go away.
Right.
This is their mechanism to make this pain stop. And so the tie-in there is whatever that physical, emotional, mental pain is that I can't deal with, I just want that to stop. And I've reached a point where the only thing that I can think of, the only solution that I can think of is death. And so that's how that kind of ties in.
So you definitely touched on a point, and you definitely mentioned, there are some people that can they learn the coping strategies necessary to like make it through and navigate through these dark times. Now, is there a particular individual that you find through your practices or through your interactions that you find is just particularly closer to going down the suicidal path, or is there a specific character trait that you would be able to identify in somebody early on that maybe put them at a higher risk for these things?
Right. So what I would look for if I'm talking to somebody that's just going through some stressors in life is number one, are you pushing people away, or are you drawing them in? So if we're pushing them away, then that's going to cause isolation. And so when we isolate ourselves, then we feel that aloneness, and soon the isolation and that feeling of being alone, it manifests itself in that's our truth in life. I have no one. So that's one of the things that I look for is what do you do in your problem? Are you talking to people about it, or are you isolating yourself from people because of it?
Right. What I'm trying to figure out is what separates, I guess, someone from going down that path. Like, take two people, person A and person B, for example. They can go through the same traumatic event, but end up at different paths. And I'm trying to figure out what separates the two, and how can we learn from the person that was successful or that managed to cope correctly, and how can we use those lessons to kind of bring the other people that are not as likely to go down that path? Is there a certain strategy that one should be approaching this with?
Right. Are you talking about from the point of view of a person that is going through a situation, or from a point of view of as me as a caregiver, what am I trying to look for? What am I trying to teach?
Let's start with.
Because really,
go ahead.
What I was going to say is because really what it comes down to as foundation is that person's foundation. So how did I grow up? So I grew up in a generation where we left the house in the morning, we went out and we played with our friends, and we had to come back in when the street lights came on. So I had to learn a lot of different coping mechanism, problem solving, those types of things early on, because you figure out where are we going to eat? We're figure out, hey, we're back in the woods playing. We're we got turned around and we're lost. How do we get back? So there's a lot of different things. Whereas what I saw in this, and I had to remind myself as a parent, I had access to my son's grades 24/7, and so I had to remind myself, I can't push him to succeed. I have to allow him to succeed on his own. I can help him, but I can't be that helicopter.
Right.
So every night, hey, I see you didn't do your homework. And the biggest message I always had was, I have to let him fail, because I would rather have him fail while I'm there to catch him, prop him back up, and allow him to move forward. Then I continually solve all his problems. I send him off to college, and now he's failing on his own. And I think that's the type of person that doesn't have that foundation, because I never learned how to cope. I never learned about failure. I never learned how to fix my mistakes. I never learned how to problem solve. So now that I'm failing, or this perception of failure, whether it be a traumatic event, whether it be, finances, bad grades, relationship breakup, I don't know how to cope with that stuff now, because I never had to do it on my own. And so I think that foundation, how did you grow up? Did you have to figure stuff out on your own, or did you have somebody always figuring stuff out for you?
That's
so that's
really
one of those
interesting.
things that I look at.
That's really interesting, because particularly with my generation, I mean, millennials, we were the generation that grew up with participation trophies. Like, oh, you didn't do good. Oh, don't worry about it. You get a participation trophy. And we thought, well, I guess the previous generation, the generation raising us, thought that was a good idea. Let's sugarcoat everything. Let's make everybody feel safe, create the safe space, when in reality, it doesn't set people up to create the correct coping mechanism.
Right.
Even though initially it hurts at first when you fail, or you didn't win the game that you were trying so hard, or you trained for. It does hurt. However, it teaches you, like you said, how to fail and how to fail correctly, so you can learn from those mistakes and cope from those mistakes. And I feel that there is somewhat of a shift in the generational aspects. Like, we kind of picked up on that, right? We learned that. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry for my dogs; they're going crazy in the background. If you can hear them, but we've noticed that this participation trophy model of making everybody feel good and everybody feeling safe might not be the best solution when we want to create a strong society that can cope with life's issues. That makes sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, exactly. So learn how to, I think the best model is learn how to make decisions, learn how to problem solve, learn how to overcome failure, in the safety of, whatever that is, your parents, whoever's bringing you up, someone that is supportive of you, instead of, pushing them out into the world, and the first time they experience failure is on their own.
Right.
I can think back of just think back of the first time that, I ever asked a girl out, and it was, or I ever, my first breakup, and how devastating that was. And oh my gosh, we broke up, we've been going out for 2 weeks, and all we did was sit down at lunch together. Well, that's, I experienced that. And so, as you move forward in life, and, I'm not saying I got broke up with all, well, I did, I guess, as I move forward in life, we learn how to handle those situations better and better, that, maybe it's not the end of the world, when something happens in life, but, and now how do I take that perception of failure, how do I build on that now? Because really, I've seen a lot of quote, failure is just, it's an opportunity to get stronger and grow.
Right, and we don't really think of failure as a phobia. We don't think of the fear. Sorry, let me correct that. The fear of failure as a phobia, and there's probably a word for it. But if I think we thought about it that way, if we could think about failure in the framework of a phobia, we could approach it like we would to desensitize anybody else to a phobia. Like, for
Right.
example, how do you, in a clinical setting, psychologists typically take someone with a phobia and they expose them to the smallest amounts of, let's just say, cleanliness, the fear of being dirty or something like that,
Right.
having, you know, or the fear of germs, something like that. Well, clinically, sometimes what they do is they expose the individual to small amounts, like the smallest amount that that individual can handle. Everybody's subjective. So obviously you have to
Right.
find where they lie on that continuum. So maybe one day it's just putting some dirt in their hand just to get them
Mhm.
desensitized to these things. So, I mean, what would
Right.
that model look like if we were to approach that in the fear of phobia to help people cope better later on?
Right. Well, all I can do is go back to how I brought up the kids. Was I let them fail. The consequence. One of the things that I did with my son was I taught him that consequence is not a bad word, because if you make decisions, all your decisions have consequences. If you choose not to do your homework, the consequence is going to be you're probably not going to do well on a test.
Right.
If you choose to do your homework, the consequence is you're probably going to do well. And so I had to allow him, because he didn't like doing homework. I had to allow him to fail, and then whatever, that thing that he was passionate about, maybe football. Okay, sorry, you can't play this week because you have failing grades, and now you got to stand on the sidelines and
Right.
watch all your friends play. Sorry, you broke this rule, so now you can't drive the car to. And so that's how we taught him that consequences can be a good word or a bad word, or not a good word or a bad word. The consequences can be negative or positive, and it was based on his decisions. And what that taught him, which was very funny to watch, was, hey, this is, if you make this decision, here's the consequence. So, hey, if you choose to do this, you're going to lose your books for a week. He was an avid reader. And so you could see his mind start twirling. Is it worth it? Should I just do this and then not have? And so it really made him start thinking about what consequences were, and could he handle the consequences that he was about to go through.
Right. And sadly, I think that there's a push, particularly with people on the internet, where they think that the system of consequences somewhat, I guess, negatively affects um, developmental learning, or it negatively affects relationships long term. And I just don't think that that's the case. Like, I was raised how you were, or how you're raising your son, in terms of, if you didn't do your homework, you don't get to play games. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, this is part of the consequences for your actions.
Right.
And it's taught me,
Yeah.
let's be proactive. Let's not,
Right.
here's what I need to do. And if I don't do this, well, then I can't have this. If I don't study hard and have good grades, then I can't have this particular job that I'm really working for. And that's the thing I really want.
Right. But we all said, hey, but if you do this, this is what you can have.
Right.
And so that's how we enforce the positive out of that too, because if we just stick with the negative, and then we're just teaching them negative.
Right. Gina says, sadly, many children in foster care didn't have people teaching them those skills. We must teach perseverance. Do you think that perseverance is taught very well in the military? You think that those are some of the most...
Yeah, well, is perseverance taught well in the military? I think it is, because from day one, when you get to military basic training, it's really all about perseverance. Can I keep going in what they're telling me to do? And that's really what they're doing in the military, is teaching you, it's breaking you down to a point where all you can do now is rebuild yourself. So we're building you into this person that can hike a mile, and then you have 3 more to go. So, hey, I'm good with that. So that's really the perseverance part of it. Run faster, shoot straighter is just, it's doing it over and over and over again. And that's, I think, what perseverance is, because, you think of the tasks that we have to do in life, and no one starts out as an expert.
Right.
And so it takes perseverance and going through, failing at things to become that expert. And I think that's with anything in life is, hey, let's keep going no matter what happens, no matter how we fail, let's keep going. And she's right. People that didn't have good parental models, we can kind of stretch that out into, it's not just foster care. It's, people that didn't have active parents in their lives, it would be the same thing. They probably didn't learn that as well. But on the flip side too, if we have to fend for ourselves, they probably learned a lot of skills that a lot of kids that have two parents in the household, that have a parent that's very active in their life, may not have learned. And so there's kind of a flip side to that too.
Right. And Gina also says, when you push too hard, though it becomes negative, we must remember we are humans.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it was always we were there. That was one thing that he knew in failure. I didn't, if he didn't want to do something, the only thing I asked him to do is stick it out for the season that he committed to. So, in baseball, he committed to the season, do that season. If you don't want to play after this one, that's fine. I support you in that. It doesn't matter what dad or mom likes. It matters what you want to do. So that's, I didn't push him to do anything that he didn't want to do, but I did ask him to finish what he started.
Right. I think that's a fair approach. Now, let's bring it back to suicide prevention and suicide awareness. Now, through my own experience with depression and thoughts of suicide, it's almost as though those thoughts in that mental state is, and this is going to sound weird, is almost seductive. It's like a siren. It's almost as though the thoughts spiral. And once you have one thought of insecurity, that thing sort of spirals and it becomes, well, how do I break out of this cycle?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Have you ever had an experience? I think it's probably the easiest to illustrate with anger. I think a lot of people can relate to anger. And when you're angry, think of like a relationship with maybe a sibling or maybe your spouse. Well, you've gotten angry and you know that you probably messed up or they messed up, and all it takes is for you just to apologize or do something different, but you're angry and you're like, screw this. I don't want to do that. I want to be angry. The emotions are seductive. And I think that if we frame it in that sense, if we frame depression and suicide in that sense, it becomes a little bit more illuminating. Oh, did my camera freeze? No. Okay, good. I think it becomes a little bit more illuminating when we frame it in that sense. Because then we get to say, all right, well, the seductive nature behind it is a real aspect. It's a real component. This is why, it's very hard when you hear somebody say, oh, I'm depressed. Like, I don't want to get up. I don't want to go do anything. I don't want to eat right. Like, I don't want to go exercise. However, those are the things that you really need to do to be getting out of these mental states. But since it's so seductive, it keeps you there.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, there's a difference too. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. So the way we illustrate it in the assist program is a river. And so if we think of a river, and it's like, it's exactly what we're talking about. As we go further and further down a river, we know every river starts shallow and calm. And as we go further and further down a river, the water gets faster. The water gets deeper, gets harder and harder to keep your head above the water. Well, what is it easier to do? Is it easier to fight, or is it easier just to want to drift? And so it's a whole lot easier to drift. And so, if we stop swimming in this river, that's, the head's going to go below water. You were talking about the spiraling, and one of the things that you talked about was, it's just easier just to sleep all the time. You don't feel like getting up. It's easier not to eat because you just don't feel like you're hungry. But I think the first thing that we have to do is differentiate what is clinical depression versus I'm sad, or I'm feeling down today. And yeah, there are days that, gosh, I just like to lay in bed all day because I don't feel like it, whatever that is. But I think we really need to take a look at, number one is, how long has this been going on? And so I look at, as I illustrate it as being in the river, I look at, my job as a person that either counsels with or, as a caregiver for somebody that's having thoughts of suicide it's almost like I'm a lifeguard. And so I'm the one standing alongside the river looking for people that are in the river that are having struggles. And so where do we push our resources? Where do we push our attention? Our money is a lot of times we're pushing it towards teaching lifeguards how to do life saving instead of teaching people how to swim. And so I think that's a big thing is number one, we have to have the lifeguards because people are going to get into the water that can't swim. People are going to enter into depression, suicidal thoughts, because you're right, the seductiveness of an end to my problems, which I can't figure out on my own. I don't see any way out. So we get that tunnel vision, like a horse wearing blinders, where all we can see is that here is my solution to all this pain that I'm feeling. And so it's very seductive because now all of a sudden I can see an end to the pain. And so instead of, forcing those blinders back open, it's just so much easier to have the thoughts of, well, if I just wasn't here, I wouldn't have to go through this pain. If I wasn't here, I wouldn't have to feel the pain of a relationship breakup. I wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. I wouldn't have to, and you're right, it's very seductive. So how do we break that cycle? Well, I think the most important thing is that person standing on the shore. Because we're all part of a community somewhere. We can probably count on two hands how many different communities we belong to, where we live, where we work, where we go to school, whatever that is, the hobbies that we have, a softball team, baseball team, church, all those different communities. But what I see, and, I don't want to blame social media, but I'm going to, is while we are so much more connected at any time in human history to each other, I think we're also more disconnected than we've ever been.
Right.
Because I know you through text, and I can't tell emotion through text, which is where so many people get in trouble, because you text me and I read my own emotion into what you're texting me. And so the communication is not there. And so we don't know people. And so if I'm in my community of my work, if I don't intimately get to know them, how they normally are, I can't see a change. And so I think that's where we break that cycle is now I have to look beyond myself. I have to put my phone down. I have to, talk to you at work, talk to you at home, talk to you in the community. Who are your neighbors? If we don't know what baseline looks like with them, they could come up to us and be fully depressed, and we just think they're a gloomy person. And so I think that's where we lack a lot right now is we just are so disconnected because of the connectedness of social media, texting, and we live life out loud on Instagram and everything is perfect.
I think
it's not true.
I think that's part of it. I don't know if it's the whole picture. I definitely think social media has played a huge part, but I think we're at such a juncture as a culture and as a international body. I feel as though we're at a loss for meaning, and there is this nuance to what meaning is in whatever meaning is, whatever that word and how it applies to you and your specific situation. We've lost it. I don't know why my camera keeps freezing. It's probably Zoom or something. But I think we've lost that sense, and I think we're trying to search for it. And we're searching for our soul in a modern society, or searching for our meaning. And however philosophical that sounds, it does seem as though the repetitive tasks that we've been doing seem as though are working the 9 to 5 jobs seems to be coming, that culture seems to be coming to an end. As we've noticed with the pandemic, people aren't going back to these jobs. Now we can speculate as to why that is. Maybe that's the minimum wage. I think that's part of the problem. I think that, you know, we've seen companies raise the minimum wage, but I think it's a lack of meaning. I don't think that people are finding fulfillment in these things where we were told we could once find them. And I think we're finding out that now, which is contributing to the increased number of suicides and depression rates. And like you said, not just sadness, but overall,
Right.
I think that those factors are all contributing. What do you think?
So yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie your meaning or that sense of meaning, you know, whether it's, you know, hey, you got to go to college and get a job, and that's where you're going to find your meaning in your life. You're going to, you know, whatever that is, would you connect meaning then to connectedness?
In a sense, yeah.
Okay.
I think that there's...
So because...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think that there's an overarching picture. And I think that there are things... I think our environment does not fit our evolution. I don't.
Okay.
I don't think our modern environment fits our brains. And what do I mean by that? Well, I don't think we were meant to be connected through a phone all the time and be digital and interact with people digitally. And I say that ironically as we do a podcast through Zoom, airing it to to YouTube and Twitch. So I say that as ironically as I can. However, I think that there's something you cannot make up through physical interaction and actually searching for meaning, and whether the connectedness is in your community. This is why I think a lot of groups actually preach volunteering and community service, because it helps to alleviate some of those symptoms.
Right.
So I think that's where I find myself. I think that there's several factors that we can do in terms of how do we approach our mental state and how do we find meaning in what we do in our community.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you look back, you know, if you go back which would be my grandparents' generation, they found meaning in connectedness,
right,
in belonging to groups. You know, you look at the VFW or the American Legion or whatever, you know, whatever group they would go out and be a part of. You know, the sitting on the porch, on the front porch. I always talk about the front porch because, you know, we've digressed from a generation that sat out on the front porch and talked to neighbors to now we put the porch in the back where we're more alone. You look at, I think people identified in the past with what they did, job-wise. I think that brought a lot of meaning to their lives. With family, that brought a lot of meaning to their lives. And you're right. Do we really have that anymore, or are we, you know, just kind of going through the motions because we need to find a job that supports us?
Right, and I think we're in that transition period. I think we're in a period of transformation. Whereas the old model for finding meaning in our jobs no longer applies to the newer generations.
No, I think you're right.
And I wonder, and I really do speculate and question what the next model is going to be. And I don't know if we're on the right path or if we're on the wrong path. But as far as I can tell, it looks like we're leaning towards the wrong path with people wanting to become influencers and wanting to become social media famous or get their 15 minutes of fame, whatever it is.
Right.
And it seems like we're leaning down that path, and maybe that's just a flashbulb bias because that's all when you look at the internet, that's what's on the internet. So there's like not the people
Right.
that are actually like the people that are actually doing stuff and like engaging outside of the internet are not going to be on the internet. So I think it's more of a
Right.
flashbulb phenomenon. So it's probably happening a lot less than what it's being made out to be. But
I'm sure.
I think we're in that transition period. I think we're trying to find a new model for meaning.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And
You know,
go ahead.
it's the reality. You know, reality TV is that's what is all over TV now. That's the shows that we watch are just watching other people's lives, and that's what's making people are getting famous for really what.
Right. And Gina says we must first
So
address.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Gina says we must first address how we treat each other, taking down the walls that mankind has built up based on class, race, politics, and alluring desire to fit in with the world.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
you're right.
I think fitting in with the world. I think that's kind of synonymous with fitting into a community. Maybe that's wrong. But I think community is very important. I think definitely finding people that you can connect with, connectivity, like going back to what you were saying.
Right. No, I think that's very important. I think we've lost sight of, as I look and see what's going on. You know, if you can connect at one time with three people, just real intimate relationship, and by intimate, I'm just talking about I know you. I know your moods. I just know you. I can sit down with you and I can tell you what's going on in my life at a deeper level. And if you can have, 3 or 4 people that you're connected to like that, just really good, close, personal friends, I think you're doing well.
Right.
And then, more so surround yourself with people that you know, but probably don't know everything about you. That's the person I can sit down and have great conversation with, but they're not going to know really that deeper down level. And I think, what she was saying about, I think we just lost sight of, because we have to classify everything. So because you believe X and I believe Y, then we can't respect each other. And I think that's so far off base. I respect your decision of how you feel, how you live. I respect you as a human being. And I think we've lost sight of that because I think we tie too much stuff onto that. And then, so we can bring that back to, suicide awareness, suicide prevention is how now does that person that may have a differing view from other people, in that community, how ostracized do they feel? How disconnected do they feel when they're trying to accept themselves and no one around them will accept them? Well, that can be very isolating to a person. And I think that, again, now you're starting to see that spiraling down into, maybe it would just be easier if I wasn't here. And so I think that common decency and respect that we show other people has really eroded away pretty far.
Right. And your comments about social media really highlight that, because it seems like there's a lack of social skills necessary, or
Right.
at least, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's something under the hood of the next generation, but it does seem like there's a lack of empathy that was once present in previous generations. And that empathy is necessary when we're talking
Right.
about connectivity and making sure you
Right.
put yourself in the other person's shoes, quote unquote, and being able to identify when someone feels a certain way without even having to explicitly say it. So
Right.
do you think that there are models that we could use? How would we be able to teach empathy in the future to the next generations? And real quick, hey, Del, see you in the chat.
How do we teach people empathy? Wow, that's I did an experiment with a group of kids I was working with once, and I challenged them to put their phones down, and sit in quiet for 5 minutes one time during the week. And not one of them did it. And I asked them the why, and every single one of them said, I didn't have time. How do you teach a person empathy? I think the first thing that we need to teach them is how do we connect with other people on a personal level without electronics. Because we can't teach a person empathy if the only time that we attach emotions to conversation or communication or interaction is we have to attach our own to, if you're sending me a text, I attach my own emotions to that text. I'm not attaching yours because I don't know what your emotions are.
Right.
And so I think it's really hard to learn empathy if you don't have real social interaction.
Do you think, I know this is kind of a tangent, but do you think that empathy should be taught in like curriculums with school, or should that be an at-home thing? No, that's kind of a tangent.
I'm going to say everything starts at home.
Yeah.
I think most everything starts at home. I think that we can probably in ways introduce it into curriculum. But I think, with everything, it's the foundation of how you grow up. Starts at home. Can we be fully reliant on our teaching people stuff only in schools? I just don't think you can. Is it possible to do with some people? Yeah. I mean, some people don't have the home life or that foundation of support outside of educators that they're ever going to see it or get it. So,
right.
Yes, I think in both areas, but I truly think a lot of it starts from home.
The reason why I asked that is because this is kind of what extracurricular activities or organizations like band or orchestra or football teams, they kind of teach those social skills or those empathy skills, because you not only do you have to work with an instrument, but you also have to be able to group think a little bit. You have to be able to understand what your teammates are doing or what your bandmates are doing, so then you can join in and find your place, so you can figure out, okay, how do I fit in here? How can I help there? What needs to be done? What needs to be picked up? And I think that in itself teaches empathy. It teaches some social skills.
Right. So, but again, that's up to the coach. That's up to the band teacher, the chorus teacher, whoever's in charge of that is not only, okay, you have a defense. I'll just go with football: defensive coach, offensive coach, head coach, special team coach.
Right.
If we're all just teaching our portion of it, and the head coach isn't teaching how this goes together, or I'm just teaching you that this is how you play the trumpet, and I'm not teaching you how you fit into the bigger picture, then we're doing an injustice to that curriculum. And so while all those things are great for teaching empathy, teaching how to be in a community, teaching how to interact with other people, I think again at that foundation is we have to teach where they fit in the bigger picture. Because I know I was a trumpet player, I could play as loud as I wanted to, but does that really fit in the big picture? Not all the time. Not all the time. I could play whatever I wanted to, but if I'm not playing along with the rest of the bands, I'm not doing any good. I'm not learning anything from it. I think it's anything in sports and any really extracurricular things that you do at school can definitely teach that, but you have to have the leadership in there that making sure that we're teaching it well.
Yeah, the foundation is incredibly important. I agree with you. I think it should start at home. I've always been one of the biggest questions on my mind right now. It has always been the reevaluation of schools, and do we need to reevaluate the purpose of schools, and do we need to teach social skills? Do we need to teach coping mechanisms at schools? And I'm still a hit or miss. I'm not sure what we should be doing, but I don't think enough conversation surrounds
Right.
that topic, specifically because, like Gina says, suicide prevention starts in childhood. If we can do these things early on to set kids up for success later,
Hmm.
like that, I mean, we're doing ourselves a favor. So I
Right.
always come back to, should we reevaluate the purpose of school? And
Yes.
I don't think enough conversation surrounds that, especially when we
Right.
talk about. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, are we teaching the next generation, or are we teaching to a test?
Right. Like, what I mean, I understand the importance of math, teaches logic,
Right.
but at what point does that? I mean, because humans are not originally logistical creatures. We're just not.
Right.
We're emotional creatures. And it doesn't matter how good, if, for example, I'm in a debate or I'm trying to convince somebody something, it doesn't matter how good my logic is, as long as my message resonates with them emotionally. That's what
Right.
matters.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, you could tell someone that's in the midst of a depression, you could say, hey, these are the steps that you have to do. I know what you should do to get better. And they could be, you need to exercise, you need to eat right, you need to, try doing mindfulness exercise so it takes you out of that, go join a peer group. Like, these are all things that are logistically correct based on a neuroscience approach. Like, these are all the things that you should be doing. However, that's a logistical approach. That is not an emotional approach. And that sometimes, and actually most of the time, does not work in terms of communicating ideas, because at the end of the day, again, we are not logical creatures. We are emotional creatures. And that is the big catch. That is the caveat.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. No, because really, I can tell you steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, but if you can't get to step 1, then all I'm doing there is I may be teaching you another thing that you failed at.
Right. And
because I'm just, like you said, I'm just logically telling you what you need to do.
Right. There's no emotion behind it. And again, at the end of the day, we connect best with emotions. Those are the kind of arguments and stories, headlines, any news headlines. The first thing they're not going to tell you, these are the statistics. I mean, they might throw statistics in there if it hits an emotional nerve.
Right. No, they're going to catch you with the. That's what clickbait is on the internet, right?
Exactly. That's basically what clickbait is.
It catches your emotion and catches your emotion and you click it.
Yeah. TC's
then 4 hours later, you're like, oh my gosh.
Why did I click that? Let's see. TC says, how can suicide prevention help first responders, teachers, and the elderly, military veterans? How can we teach people to ask for help? I think it's making it more acceptable, making it more not acceptable. What's the right word?
No, you're right there.
Is that the right word?
You're hitting the nail on the head. It's I would say acceptable is probably not the right word, but it's making suicide, making depression, making counseling, making seeking help not a bad word. So it's shifting the paradigm of it's okay to not be okay, and so it's okay to say, hey, you know what? I can't figure this out by myself, so I'm going to need professional help.
Right.
Because for some reason, when I break my leg, it's okay that I can't put a screw in my leg and cast it and make it okay. I have to go seek professional help. But then when I'm going through an experience where, you know what, I can't handle everything on my own because I can't figure out now how to make my head stop spinning, can't figure out, I can't even think straight enough to find a solution to my problem. It's okay to go seek professional help for that. It's okay to talk to someone else about that. And I think that we become stigmatized, especially in first responder, military, firefighters, police, in those areas, we become so destigmatized that, I have to keep doing this, so I'm not allowed to allow this to affect me. And that's just not right. And I think he talked about elderly too. When we think about elderly, whatever age TC wants to attach to that, because I know him personally, it's think about, as I grow older, I listen to my parents. I listened to my grandparents prior to them talk about, so and so passed away. And as we start to experience more and more loss, whether it's a spouse, a job, even a loss of, I can't drive anymore. I can't take care of myself anymore. We're dealing with loss on so many different levels. It's okay to feel a sense of loss, and it's okay to talk about it. And so I think it's just admitting it's okay to be not okay.
Right. I think taking a shotgun approach to this is somewhat more of the best. Whereas I think increasing the number of available resources is incredibly helpful as well, making it, like you said, more acceptable, but also educating people on the importance
Right.
of, well, like you said, using your example and building off that. Why do we think of physical injury as the only type of injury, as the only type of acceptable thing to seek
Right.
help for? Well, mental injury and mental pain, trauma, those things build up. Those require help, as professional of help as seeking help for, maybe I just sprained my ankle and now I need to cast it or something like that. And TC also said, how can I help as a community member?
Right.
That's a good question.
It's a look at a population, looking at a group inside of a so name a community. So what is the roadblock in that community to seeking help? Is it that the stigma is attached to it? So when you think of first responders, is it that I'm only comfortable, so I'll just attach it to military? I know dealing with military people, if they go out and talk to a civilian counselor, they'll talk once and that's it. They don't speak my language. And so that's a barrier. How do we remove that barrier? If we look at, a community where they don't have accessible mental health programs within that community, how do we overcome that barrier and get them to the right resources that they're going to speak to? A population that might feel disenfranchised. What are those barriers against going to talk to somebody, so that you can effectively work through problems? And so I think that's really one of the things that we need to educate, not only as a caregiver but as communities on, is what are the barriers and how do we remove those barriers to getting help?
That's a really good, really important point that you made. The point about veterans being weary of talking to civilian counselors, and it goes back to our initial issue with empathy. The counselor could be as knowledgeable in the solutions to get from point A to point B. However, since they don't empathize, since they can't relate on an actual experiential level, it's hard for the client or the person seeking help to understand that, hey, initially, if I'm the client and I'm sitting there and I'm talking to, a civilian counselor, and I just went to war and experienced all these traumatic events, it becomes, well, what do you know? Like, I understand
Right.
the knowledge, but what do you really know? You haven't seen what I've seen. And if you saw what
Right.
I saw, well, then maybe we would be in the same predicament. So I think that that's a really good point. It's diversifying the level of help on a counselor level as well, so that people feel comfortable when they go to seek help, that they're getting somebody in return that's going to relate to them and know exactly where they came from. I think that that's a very good point.
And I think that's a huge roadblock for so many people, is because they don't feel a comfort level in opening up to somebody that they don't feel understands or empathizes with them, because we don't have shared experience.
That's a very good point. Wow, that's a very good point. I didn't think about it like that. I mean, initially, we didn't start off with connecting those two ideas, but I'm glad we ended up where we ended up, because that was a very good point. Well, thank you, Mr. Scott. We are at 9:01 tonight. That's a really quick hour.
It was a quick hour.
Well, thank you, Scott, for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Daydreams. The video will be posted again. In just a little bit, it'll be posted to YouTube. So I hope everybody has a fantastic evening. Scott, I will keep you on here so we can chit chat for a second. But thank you, TC, for setting this up. Thank you, Mom, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everybody who tuned in and made a comment. I really appreciate that. Yes, Dale, Stark is barking in the background. Not now, but he was earlier. So thank you, everybody. I hope you've had a fantastic evening daydreaming with us, and I see you guys Thursday. Take care. Bye, everybody.